In today's episode, we're going to be talking about three of the greatest tennis players of the modern time. We're going to be talking about Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, and Novak Djokovic. Now, each of these legends has a unique approach to their game, their practice, their philosophy, yet all of them have achieved incredible success. And I want to be drawing some parallels to their approach into the way that we can use this to grow our practice. One of the things that I learned is that of the coaching businesses that are well in advance of what I'm doing in terms of impact and income and the freedom that these owners have, it's not that they're doing fancy things, it's just that they have mastered the basics. This is the real on-the-ground impact that happens from us doing basic things. This is the power of simplicity, and many of us, when we're wanting to grow our practice, are going for complexity. Good morning. Good afternoon and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast, the podcast where I have the pleasure of simplifying the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about three of the greatest tennis players of the modern time. We're going to be talking about Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, and Novak Djokovic. Now, each of these legends has a unique approach to their game, their practice, their philosophy, yet all of them have achieved incredible success. And I want to be drawing some parallels to their approach into the way that we can use this to grow our practice. But before we dive into that, I want to revisit last week's episode. In last week's episode, I shared with you three strategies to help you add an extra 50 visits onto your practice between now and Christmas. We're still sitting at the middle of the year here. The intent of that episode was several things, but most of all, the three things that I shared with you were very simple. Okay, we talked about getting more Google reviews and sharing testimonials. We talked about the importance of building relationships inside of your community, and I talked about getting better on video or better with video. Now, I received a message from a client after he listened to that episode, and he wanted to share something with me. He tells me that a number of weeks ago, I helped him put together a testimonial. So he videoed a patient of his who was sharing their story. There's a number of questions. If you wanted to put together a testimonial, now remember, okay, you Aussies and Kiwis out there that can't do that, but the rest of the world, you can. We really want to ask people about their journey. Why did they come in to see you? Were there any fears or frustrations? What were they not able to do beforehand? What are they able to do now? And if somebody out there was suffering from the same problem as them, what recommendations? And we end up with this getting really lovely little narrative arc. We can cut out the actual questions that are being asked by you, the chiropractor, or the CA. And this is a really effective kind of format for a testimonial. Now, Chris used this testimonial. He put it up onto his Facebook and he boosted it. And he boosted it for the grand total of $2 a day. And he's been doing that for somewhere between the last 6 to 8 weeks. Now, this video now has 4,700 views. Now, that's not a lot of views. I mean, it's not 100, it's 4,700. There were 4,700 people sitting in a room. That would be super impressive. But for many chiropractors, when we're looking for views on our videos, we want to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and even millions. We've had several of our videos get millions of views, and it's made zero difference to our practice. Okay, when a video goes viral for a brick and mortar practice like we have as chiropractors, it doesn't help us grow our practice. Now, if you have a digital and online business where you are in some form of business relationship with people from around the world, then getting millions of views might be useful. But our audience are in the kind of 5 to sort of 15 kilometer radius in around our practice. So the goal is never for us to be getting millions of views or even hundreds of thousands of views. Now, Chris went on to tell me, because he's very good at knowing his numbers and tracking this, and he said these 4,700 views is now turned into more than $9,000 of closed cases from that alone, okay? A simple testimonial that's been boosted, okay? There's no special offer that it's going to. There's no fancy funnels. There's none of that kind of business there. This is the power of simplicity, and many of us, when we're wanting to grow our practice, are going for complexity, okay? We've got funnels and email sequences that we're trying to put in there. We've got landing pages we're trying to build there. We're looking at these sophisticated ways for us to bring patients into our practice. Now, is there room for these? Yes. Once you've got the basics all down, going to sophistication, sometimes there can be room for that. But what I'm realizing in my business is it's about me optimizing the basics. You know, I did an episode again just recently where one of the things that I learned is that of the coaching businesses that are well in advance of what I'm doing in terms of impact and income and the freedom that these owners have. It's not that they're doing fancy things. It's just that they have mastered the basics. Okay, so I wanted to share that with you in terms of this is the real on-the-ground impact that happens from us doing basic things. Now, with that said, let's move back to the tennis players. Now, I was listening to a podcast recently where there was a couple of guys, sports podcasts, talking about these tennis players. And they were talking, what's interesting about each of these is they've all played in the modern era. They've all played against each other. And so they've had similar equipment. They've had similar courts that they've played on and in a similar environment as well. So we can have great comparisons about who's the greatest. And there'll be lots of different arguments. I think Novak Djokovic at the moment is the one that's actually won the most Grand Slams. Forgive me for this too, but what was interesting about this though is they were talking about the different styles of these tennis players. Okay, so I did a little bit of research leading into this. So we'll start with someone like Rafael Nadal. Okay, his approach was relentless. His work ethic, physical, mental toughness as well. His practice was always incredibly intense. His game was all about physical conditioning and relentless repetition, okay? He literally, from a philosophy point of view, every point was a brand new challenge. Now, if you looked at him physically on the court, he looked impressive. Like he had arms like an athlete there too. Amazing legs. He really didn't have the same sort of physique that many tennis players had. When he came out onto the court, his warm-up was so intense that he was already perspiring. Okay, this was the Nadal approach. Now, if we contrast this with somebody like Federer, Federer was all about elegance and efficiency and strategic thinking. His emphasis was on technique and balance and maintaining physical and mental freshness. If there was a philosophy, it was about playing smart, not hard. He was he was often joking. You could hear him joking beforehand. He would joke with the ball boys and girls, the coach people in the crowd there too. There wasn't a real heaviness and a seriousness that we might see in someone like Djokovic. Okay, so analytical, balanced. He has this incredible holistic training, including diet and mental conditioning. Now, I know his chiropractor. It's an Aussie guy, Steve Cicinas, who's been working with him over the last couple of years. Incredible results. And when Steve goes to work with him for the 2 weeks in around a Grand Slam, Steve's diet is under control. Like Djokovic wants to know what his chiropractor is eating, and he's in control of where Steve goes and when he goes and tracks all of Steve's movements in around there too. And so this is the sort of control freak that someone like Djokovic is. His philosophy would be of total preparation for total performance. So we've got three amazing tennis players there. You could have an argument to say that each of these is possibly the greatest modern male tennis player of the time. And yet the approaches, the way they go about practice, and the philosophy, all incredibly different. Now, the reason I want to share this with you, and the whole point of this podcast, is to let you know that there is no one right path. Now, this sucks to hear as a chiropractor who wants to grow their practice, and this sort of philosophy doesn't necessarily sell many coaching programs or books or seminars, but it's the truth. Now, just because something is right for somebody else doesn't mean that it's right for you. Now, there's a whole bunch of negative consequences that come from us thinking that there's only one right path. Imagine for a moment what would have happened if Federer had have adopted Nadal's approach, went for a purely physical approach. Now, chances are that his body would have broken down, his career would have been short, and he would never have had the wins that he amassed over his career. And the same could be said that if Djokovic went about adopting Federer's approach, okay, so that light-hearted, laid-back approach probably would never have worked for Djokovic. So in finding success in practice, the first thing that we've got to do is we've got to let go of that the way for me to find this is through somebody else's path, okay? Now, there is a pandemic in society nowadays with an obsession in around finding the one right way. We're wanting to know the hack for this, the shortcut for that. I'll show you exactly how to grow your practice. I'll show you how to market your practice. I'll show you the one right way to do your report of findings. I'll show you exactly how you should be adjusting, okay? Now, when we go down the one right path, to some extent, what we're trying to do is shortcut. And I understand it, okay? We all want to minimize the expenditure of energy. This is literally hardwired into us from a neurological point of view. Minimize glucose burning, okay? But it was BJ, one of my favorite BJ quotes. Again, I'll paraphrase it as well. He says, taking the path of least resistance is what makes men and rivers crooked. So taking somebody else's pathway, the reason it worked for them is because it was them. When I look at friends of mine, for instance, Tony Ebel, who I just love what he brings to the chiropractic world, but there's no way that I could do what Tony does. His work ethic, his focus, all those things works beautifully for his brain. It works for his family. It works for his community, and it works for his vision and his mission. And if I were to adopt that, then chances are I would burn out. It wouldn't be a match for me. There'd be no, there's elements of freedom that I want in my life that just wouldn't happen to me or happen for me if I went through the same methods that Tony did. So how do we go about approaching all of this? I want to give you some guardrails or guide rails. Imagine that we're playing 10-pin bowling. Maybe we can get those bumpers on the side. That means that we don't go in the gutters. We want to have coaches in our lives, and we want to have support. We want to learn from those that have walked in front of us, because they can beat down a lot of the paths, but we have to be looking through the right sort of lens. So the first thing I want to encourage you to do is don't hurry into making decisions, okay? So if you're looking to work with somebody, if you're looking for a new technique, if you're wanting to improve your report of findings, we can let go of the scarcity that there's only one right way, okay? Now, whether that be a coaching program like Community Influencer, whether that be with one of the several other dozens, maybe there's hundreds of others out there as well, then put in some time. Ask yourself, look, this is working for those people, but is there something about those people why it worked? And am I different to them? Now, I often, this is one of the bees I get in my bonnet when I hear chiropractors saying, particularly older chiropractors, more experienced chiropractors saying, look, I never did a day of marketing in my life. I built all of this through internal marketing. Now, this is through internal referrals. This is something that certainly practices of 2 decades ago would have found a whole lot easier than today. Mostly because there were less chiropractors, mostly because there was less competition. We could do that then, and often in those situations too, particularly if we're looking through the 80s and somewhat into the 90s over in North America, there was a whole bunch of insurance support. Okay. Now, you will find exceptions of that case, and still there are practices that I know of here in Australia that are built on referrals, but it's a chiropractor in a town where there's no competition. Like, you're the only choice. So if you're in a town and there's 15,000 people and you're the only chiropractor, if you don't have an epic practice inside of 2 years, then I hate to say this, you really suck. Like, if you're the only choice and you don't have a waiting list of people there, and you can't therefore go and tell the other chiropractors they should do what you do, because it's that environment that made it work for you. So if you're selling a system, we need to look outside that. Why might that have worked for that person? Okay. So just because it worked for someone else doesn't mean that it'll work for you. And it doesn't mean that that's the way that you'll have to do it. I was watching a documentary recently on Amazon Prime, and it was about the 10 greatest paintings of all time. And inside of that, one of the paintings that they were talking about is Sunflowers from Vincent van Gogh. And it followed him right the way through his career. He was a Renaissance painter, and so painted in the similar kind of style that you might see Da Vinci and even Michelangelo painting in. But when you look at Van Gogh's paintings in that style, they're horrible. Like, you just look at them and the faces are all out of perspective and their noses look big and bulbous. And there's something about these early works there that just didn't work for him. Now, there was a certain brush style that they wanted to do. Like, literally, they painted in a way there that you couldn't see the brush strokes at all. You wanted some of it almost to look photographic in the way that it turned out. And he wasn't a great painter this way. And it wasn't until he went away and started to play and experiment with different styles of painting that ultimately led to him creating, the series of sunflower paintings. Now, if you look at that sunflower painting, you can see big, thick blobs of paint on there. It's like he's thrown the paint on there. You can see brush strokes everywhere. Yet there's tremendous beauty there, okay? He worked out what worked for him, okay? Now, in order for us to be able to do this, then we need to make sure that we have a growth mindset. We need to change our relationship with failure, okay? Now, if we have a really lousy relationship with failure, then that's one of the reasons why we want to jump on the coattail of a coach or a mentor. That's why we want to follow their path, because we're scared of failing, okay? Now, the fact of the matter is, regardless of the journey, okay, and even if you're going on the right path is very rarely ever a straight line. There are ups and downs and lefts and rights. And in amongst that journey, there are going to be opportunities for you to learn something new. And so I like this concept, and what we teach to our staff is we teach a concept of adopt then adapt. So a new office manager come into the practice. She's been with us for about the last 10 weeks, and she's had a really strong history in sales, okay? And so when we were taking her through our front desk systems, and particularly when we were taking her through our bring-ups and our recalls and how we deal with missed visits there too, she had a whole bunch of suggestions and things that she wanted to change immediately, okay? Now, we had to pull her back. And so first of all, we had to acknowledge her enthusiasm, say we're really thrilled that you've got things to bring into the practice, but we've got 15 years head start on you inside of this. This is a system that we know works, and we know that it can be improved, but we want you to get this system down first. We want you to adopt this system first and then adapt it, okay? So that's what I like in any coaching model. And when I'm teaching community influencer members, we had a training call last week all in around how to run an effective re-exam or progress exam, as they're often called there too. And when I go through this, I go through the ingredients. What are we trying to achieve with it? And then I want to go through multiple ways that we can do this so that you can build your own. Now, it might be wonderful for community influencer members. If I told them exactly how to do it, they would feel great. But when they try to implement that, if it wasn't authentically them, it's not going to work. We're all different. What works for Angus is not going to work for somebody else there too. So this is where we want to adopt within the framework. I'm going to make sure that you don't, strike out if we go back to the bowling or into the gutter with gutter balls there too. I'm going to give a framework there. But as with all things, what we want to do is I want to teach you to fish, not just give you a fish. Now, this same applies with our practice members as well. We have to teach them to understand vitalistic, naturalistic, holistic, conservative chiropractic care, nerve system first chiropractic care. And when we teach them how to do this, when we see them as a creator, when we see them somebody who can make a great choice, then that's the avenue through which they can become a really incredible patient. So let me sum all of this up there too. I want to take some of the pressure off your shoulders of thinking that there has to be one right way for you to build the practice that you want to build. There are several right ways. Now, there are also several wrong ways as well, okay? And in terms of finding a right way, I want you to take some pressure off yourself, okay? You don't have to follow just because there's some guru out doing it this way. There may well be a different way that will work for you, okay? Get rid of the time pressure. Get rid of the scarcity in amongst this too. Find people that are getting the results that you want to get and make sure that it fits inside of the philosophy, the vision, and the values that you want to have as well. And then to begin with, adopt, okay? But as soon as you start to have that down and you're starting to move forward to it, then adapt it, okay? This is where we want you to come through with it. Now, Van Gogh learned the basics of his painting through the other style, and then he started to adopt it. And that's what made him one of the world's greatest patients as well. Folks, that's it for this episode. As always, thanks for all that you do. Keep saving lives. I look forward to seeing you back here next week. Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.